Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Determination, Deliberation, and Dragons, where we talk about dragons with determination and deliberation. I'm Peter, and this is Izzy,
Hey, hey.
and we're going to talk about the seventh story in the Pana and Wave Skimmer cycle through the theme of responsibility. But first, we're going to talk about another story that features responsibility very heavily. Avatar the Last Airbender. So
Whoa!
I know it's such an amazing show.
But somebody has some views on it.
I mean, a lot of people have viewed it. I'm very confused.
No, I mean, I guess certain preferences for a later show.
Oh, I like Legend of Korra way better. But Avatar the Last Airbender is still like amazing. It's incredible. It's a wonderful show. But that's not the point here. We are not debating. Um that there's a potentially a later episode. But right now we just wanted to really look at the idea of responsibility as shown through the character of Aang the Last Airbender, the Avatar. So like the Avatar is this person who can like master all four elements and like bring balance to the world and is supposed to be like the bridge between the spirits and the non-spirits, the humans.
Human.
Um so it's a position with a lot of responsibility. And for Aang, there's this even bigger sense of responsibility because he becomes the Avatar right at the beginning of a war. Everyone's worried about the Fire Nation attacking, the possibility of attack. So they tell Aang that he's the Avatar much younger, when he's much younger than like most Avatars are told. And the Airbenders are really scared, and they're right to be afraid. They do all get massacred like very shortly after that. But Aang is this 12-year-old kid, and he's really frightened, and he doesn't want to be the Avatar. He just wants to be a kid and like play with the other kids. So he leaves the Air Temple, and he feels guilty about it like way 100 years later when he's finally found again.
It doesn't feel like 100 years to him, but yes.
Yeah, I mean he has no idea at first. But I think we were talking specifically about the episode The Storm, where we find out this backstory, that Aang left. And we see like some just normal people in the world, like this fisherman and his wife, and they're like, oh yeah, like we don't like the Avatar too much. Like you left us, and like this war is like your fault. Like you could have stopped it. And we see Aang like really struggle with like the idea of wanting to be a kid and his responsibility as the Avatar. So, it's really hard to like have this duty to the rest of the world and to these bigger things when you're, especially when you're a kid and you just want to play. But even like as an adult, it's difficult to balance doing things for yourself and for the greater good. And I think that's really what I wanted to try to explore in my story. Not saying my story comes anywhere close to the storm, um, because it does not. But I think there's still this idea of finding out this information. So like Pana finds out some important information and has to figure out what they are going to do with it. Do you have anything else you want to add, or shall I summarize the story?
Pana does find out that information in the previous chapter, and then this is the chapter where they're like digesting it and processing. But yes, I also realized my memory of the storm was not as stellar as I had thought it was, but a lot is packed into that episode of Aang's past and also some side stories with other characters that all do center around the theme of responsibility or, consequences for actions that you didn't quite realize, like unintended consequences, and that you still, have to take responsibility for once they happen. So, also, I guess kind of thinking Pana, being in that scary place of not having really, or having acted and thinking back on the actions that they have done and how they did or didn't take responsibility for it, but also thinking about how can they maybe change that in the future and not knowing quite how.
Yeah, so basically, let's just summarize the story kind of very
Yes.
briefly. There's not a lot that's going on. It's a lot of just everyone wakes up from their visions and like Pana's trying to
But there is a lot going on.
in terms of like events. So it's Pana's trying to like figure out and like think through what they saw, what they do with that information, and they're really struggling because like the last time they went out and tried to like help their community was on their hunting party trip, which didn't go well. So now that they have another opportunity to help people, they're really nervous about it. So they're trying to like think through that. They like walk out of a meeting that they were having with the others. They like hide at the front of the boat in a very conspicuous way. They can't. It's hard for a dragon to hide. So, and then all of that is kind of interrupted when another dragon shows up and starts attacking the boat. It's a dragon that like followed them from up north. Because in my mind, like all the dragons right now are up north in the ice. So this is one that was like in the cave when Pana was there, and Pana has to like help defeat the dragon. They don't realize that Vari also shows up and is like trying to organize things like on the boat because Pana's like flying up on Wave Skimmer and like doing things up in the air. So that was really fun. I like having them both in like the same place at the same time, but like unaware of each other. I mean, Vari knows, but like Pana's unaware. And then they defeat the dragon through getting a lot of other animals to come and do things. So they manage to get the dragon in the water, and then they like the people on the boat end up capturing it and like netting it. And then Pana has like a fun chat with the dragon, and then they decide to go and find the weapon. Oh, and they have like a wardrobe change for like the first time.
Or like the second or third. They had like a little poncho and then like a shirt.
This is the first time where I like actually described it decently
Yeah,
and like where I
that's true.
like the outfit. And it's not just like, well, we need something that's not like furs because it's too hot out and we're dying out here. So this one was fun. I enjoyed it. But yeah, that's basically it.
Yeah. No, I think you sold the aerial dragon battle a little short. That was a big event.
Yeah, I don't know how well I wrote it. I'm not thrilled with like battle scenes. Partly I just don't want there to be battles, which is why I like saved the dragon at the end. If anyone had hurt that dragon, even though it was attacking them, I would have been very upset.
You can control this as the writer.
That is a good point.
But I thought it was a nice battle. Nice as in like exciting to read, not nice as in like, oh no, they're in mortal peril with a broken arm flying a dragon. Like, I know nobody else has ever flown on Wave Skimmer, but I'm just like, did Pana have to be the passenger? What were they contributing by being a passenger with a broken arm on the dragon on Wave Skimmer?
I mean, no one else is allowed to ride Wave Skimmer for now. At least Pana like has to be there. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and I think again that speaks to the idea of like so neither Pana nor Wave Skimmer are like warriors by any means. And I think most of what they do is like just evading and like trying to distract the dragon, like more so than fight it.
Mm-hmm.
So even with their like one bad arm, they're just trying to like buy time for everyone on the ship to like figure out what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. No, I guess my question is more that couldn't Wave Skimmer have done that without Pana on his back?
I mean, yeah, it would have been possible, but like in my mind, they just don't do things separately if they can help it. I mean, my understanding is like even though nothing bad was going to happen because I'm the writer, like the characters don't know that, so they wouldn't want either one of them to like go alone and like do something like this.
Mm-hmm.
So like Pana had to be there with Wave Skimmer.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I kind of like the idea of having, like, shared responsibility for a task and not having it be, I'm the only savior of this whole group or whatever. I also really like the immediate part where the ship captain was immediately calling Pana out for trying to, like, take control of the situation and be like, here's the plans, everybody, I'm giving orders. And then she was like, heck no, I'm the captain here.
You gotta respect that chain of command. Yeah, I don't know if Pana and like Wave Skimmer, like I don't think there's necessarily a shared responsibility to like the task. I mean there is for sure, but I think like primarily it's like this shared responsibility to each other. So, I mean, like yes, they both have this task and like yes, like Wave Skimmer could have gone alone, and I think it's this idea of like them feeling responsible for each other and like what each other gets up to and their safety. So, I
Mm-hmm.
think that is an element as well. So like responsibility is like being directed in like towards multiple directions at once.
Mm. I like that interpretation, but I still feel like it's more on the irresponsible side for Wave Skimmer to let Pana come with them with a broken arm,
Yeah.
flying in the air. I mean, I understand emotionally why they both want to make that choice. But I as a reader, was like, why is this the choice they're making? But it does have good meaning behind it.
Oh, it's totally irresponsible, but like I don't think they realize that either. I mean, I need to do a better job of showing this, and I think we had a similar conversation with Story 4, where like I really view Wave Skimmer and like Pana as being like very incapable at like fighting and stuff. To a certain
Mm-hmm.
extent, like they have their moments, especially in like Story 9, where they just have to do stuff. But I think when they have a moment to like think about it, it's like there's some time before this dragon even gets here, and they're like debating with the captain and the other people. So I don't even think it crosses Wave Skimmer's mind like, oh, it might be irresponsible to like have this injured human like go up in the air with me.
I think Wave Skimmer is at a bit of a disadvantage because I had no idea what. I mean, he can't talk in the
Yeah,
story, so I had no idea what his thoughts were other than, like, you know, Pana being like talking to Wave Skimmer and me assuming Wave Skimmer agrees with everything Pana says.
yeah. I like Pana just interpreting Wave Skimmer. I have moments where like it's from his perspective, but not many.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in this case it would have just made things a little bit slower. Like it was already slow when the dragon's like coming and it takes a little while, but I needed it to go like a little bit faster.
No, I think, like, definitely it wouldn't be necessary to say, like, switch point of view, POV, all of the time to get Pana and then Wave Skimmer and then Pana and then Wave Skimmer. I guess I'm thinking more along the lines of how can, like, different actions that Wave Skimmer is shown to do have a little bit more impact in showing, the thoughts behind those actions. Because, I mean, also partly he does, constantly accompany Pana, which, says a lot about their relationship already. But I guess he sometimes just kind of fades into the background. Not that he necessarily needs to be, like, constantly doing stuff, but also I guess he's a little bit too big to fit in the room sometimes, so just his head fits into the meeting room. But yeah, I guess I'm thinking of a way to, like, weave him into the action, or, have a facial expression here or there.
Yeah. No, I need to figure that out. And like one thing I tried doing was like having Wave Skimmer's scales change colors. And I tried writing like a reference for like what all the different colors mean. And then I kind of just like
Mm-hmm.
abandoned it and now I go with like whatever color I feel like in the moment as like the message I'm trying to get across. So like sometimes green is like calm, but sometimes it's sick. I mean, but I also feel like that's, the colors have different meanings. So like the same color has different meanings, so I'm kind of okay with with the inconsistencies there.
Oh no, I don't mind the color. I like the color changing.
Yeah, but no, my point is just like trying to like figure out how to use that as a way to like express wave skimmer.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I'm working on it.
Mm-hmm. Very giant mood light.
Pretty much.
No, I do like, now that I am thinking about it, the color thing does show up, and it is helpful for like emotional and like physical state to know how Wave Skimmer is. I would have liked, in the previous chapter, if we saw a little vision from Wave Skimmer. Because I assume he fell asleep, but I don't know if it was specified that he also fell asleep.
Oh, I think he did. Yeah, I don't remember if I specify that either.
Because I was thinking, even if he didn't, he wouldn't have left.
Yeah. Oh, I really don't know. I mean, that's a whole different conversation though about like adding in a scene with a vision of his in there.
Mm-hmm. Not that that chapter isn't packed full enough.
I know, I already have the vision from Bob though, and I really like Bob's vision.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's something I would do. Oh, I need to think about that. Maybe that's a separate short story, like a companion thing.
I could just be, somebody notices Wave Skimmer is asleep on the deck and changing colors as he snores.
Aw, that would
That
be
would be
so
cute too.
cute.
Yeah. But, I mean, even thinking back when I wasn't sure if he would leave the boat or not when everyone was asleep, I was like, I mean, obviously he would never leave because Pana is there. And, like, as you said, like, he feels responsible for Pana's welfare. And by extension, the welfare of everyone else on the boat.
Yeah. I mean, and everyone in this story too, there's the responsibility to like the boat, and you see everyone like kind of helping out, at least everyone who can. And I think it was important to like have Vare in there too. So definitely like in story 5 and in this story, having her like help out and try to do her best and like show her concern for everyone else. So I'm really just trying to like drive home her sense of responsibility to her community and like people in general, even if that leads her to do some like not great things.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thought. I mean, because now when you say that, I do think of like definitely the idea of, individual rights or privileges versus the well being of the community, and how those things can come into conflict, and how interpretations of what constitutes a community, like good or, individual right, like what are you actually, allowed to do, or, what is going too far. And I think it can be it's definitely taken advantage of in both ways, where like Vare would be the sign of like going a little bit too hard on like community well-being versus individual. I mean, not that Pana didn't indirectly harm people, but going a little bit too hard on the punishment side of it. And then definitely many cases of individuals being like, screw the community, screw other people.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say like, well, I mean, Vari's not like a perfect example of like community responsibility because we will see an example of her like really endangering the community very shortly, potentially. I don't know, spoilers, sorry. Um, but just this idea of like it being a constant struggle, like, oh, who are you responsible to? And what responsibility, like what loyalty do you act on in any given moment? So she definitely has like a lot of things to think through, and she certainly has different actions depending on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
But I really enjoy having the two of them in the same scene together. I think it's super fun, even when Pana has like no idea.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too because the other characters on the boat truly don't know that they have any connection to each other. So they're both just kind of able to operate completely independently, and there isn't any kind of, undercurrent from the other characters of like, oh, are these two gonna see each other? What's gonna happen? Because they just don't know that there's anything going on.
Yeah. And I love that, like, I don't know how realistic it is, but I love that, like, they're both friends with the same people. So, like, Pana will talk with, like, Bob and Tally and MC and the captain, and then Pana leaves, and then Vari will talk with all of those people. So, I mean, I guess, like you said, like, these people have no idea that Vari and Pana know each other, so they probably don't feel compelled to, like, tell each other about them.
Mm-hmm.
But I just love that we can go from, like, we can kind of, like, just change up the characters, and we have these scenes of, like, these groups working together, and in one moment it's Pana, and, like, in the other moment it's Vare, with all the same people. I'm having fun with it.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of interpret it as the friends that Pana happened to make are the ones that do feel a very strong investment in the community beyond just, the bare minimum of like, I'm gonna not let my dog poop on the sidewalk. But they're people who actively invest more into the communal well being, which is why two strangers to the community were automatically befriended by them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Yeah, like Bob, Tally, and MC, they have this responsibility to the community and, like, to these new people who have entered the community and, like, making sure that they're okay.
Yeah, like even when Pana first meets the trio, they're like, "Oh, you have a broken arm. I guess we should fix that." Which I mean is a reasonable reaction, but also very it was very clear their mindset of like helping people first before even thinking of, do you have money to pay for us to fix your arm? Or even just, do you have somewhere else to go? Do you know where a doctor is? Because we are
Hmm.
not responsible for doing the healing, but we could maybe play an intermediary role.
Yeah, or, like, even, like, there's no question of, like, who are you? It's just like,
Mm-hmm.
they say hi and then they're like, oh wait, your arm. And they go and help. And even with Vare too, I think when they meet Vare, like, they're helping people.
Yeah. I think they're like a good example of like, I mean, they do live right next to the port, so it is still an extension of their community, but they don't actually live in the port.
Yeah, they're in, like, the
So,
suburbs. Not really. It's a farm, but yeah.
the wilderness rural suburbs.
Yes.
Yeah. So it is a part of their community, but still the extent to which they step in, when they could just go back to their farm and be, well, they probably wouldn't be safe from the tidal wave, but they would, without the tidal wave, they would be safer at their farm in a storm than at the port.
Yeah, probably.
So they are putting their own, like, well being at risk.
Yeah. I mean, moving on from that, one thing, so, like, the biggest part of this story is Pana trying to come to terms with the information that they find out about these, like, weapons of mass destruction that have previously caused the apocalypse, and, like, finding out that there's still a lot more of them out there that haven't gone off yet. And they're trying to figure out, like, do we go and destroy these weapons, or do we just leave it up to someone else? I mean, I'm just curious, like, what you made of that struggle, and, like, is it believable? Is there anything that can, like, improve upon with that?
I mean, I think the struggle always, for me, almost always has to be in a narrative, like that follows sort of like, you know, if it's a story that involves somebody like saving the world, there has to be the main character having at least one moment of doubt about whether they want to do it or not. Otherwise, I'm probably not going to really like the character. But I've also seen stories where the character has so many doubts. This is not Pana, but where the character has so many doubts and keeps waffling back and forth between whether or not they should do a thing. It drives me nuts, but I think it's very necessary for a person, for a character, to be shown having those kinds of thoughts, because either there's some kind of conflict going on that we can't see for a character who just immediately signs on to some suicide mission, or the character just feels a little bit like Superman-y, which doesn't feel like, or at least the kind of character that depending on the kind of story, the character I would enjoy reading is not the Superman kind of character that is just like so above us mere mortals, but is really a person with their own thoughts and feelings twirling around inside them. I think you did carry over a really good idea of this kind of conflict, where Pana's like, well, I did all these other things and I ran away from them, like Aang kind of runs away in the storm from the air temple because he's like, I can't do this responsibility, I can't be the Avatar. And vaguely similarly, Pana runs away from the village, not because they're the Avatar. The village is just kind of turned against them, basically. And it's not possible for them to live there anymore, which is different than... I guess it's not really a responsibility per se that was being thrust on them, but more like physical harm. The threat of physical harm.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very different situation.
But it is still definitely an interesting conflict, because I do feel skeptical when a character is like, I'm up for it, let's go, immediately. So, I mean, interesting and also just necessary to me to have that conflict in the story. But there are times when people overplay their hand. I don't think it's done in this case, because Pana literally just found out these weapons existed, having literally no idea that they existed. And all of a sudden, well, I mean, they had, inklings that the fate of the world was on their shoulders from earlier in the stories, receiving the giant, not the giant stone, but receiving the stone. And being told this could save the world, and having no idea what that really meant. But now, having a fuller picture of it, it's like, oh, what am I actually signing on to by carrying this rock around with me?
Yeah, like the responsibility is growing for sure. They're learning about it as they go along. So they definitely had no idea like what they were getting involved with, but they're learning.
Mm-hmm. Which I think, yeah, that's like a realistic portrayal of like, the more the more you know to question,
Hmm.
or the more you know to feel coming up against your own limits, which Pana definitely is. It's like, I'm just one person, is like, can I even do this? And definitely I think in a flashback for the previous chapter where they were concerned about, am I even enough, back when they were a little kid? Like, will I make my father proud? So definitely feelings of, wanting to contribute but not being sure if their contribution is enough, which, hits at a lot of people's feelings, I think.
Oh my gosh, that's just so like such a present conversation in like environmental circles too.
Mm.
Just like, oh, can we as an individual do anything to stop climate change?
Mm.
And like, no, but like if enough individuals, and just like ultimately what do people decide to do? Is it like they just go about their lives and then, write to politicians to like change laws and like corporations to do things? So there's definitely just in our own world a sense of like, is this something that I can accomplish? Or does someone else, like some bigger entity, like need to do it? Like what can I even accomplish if I do anything at all? So, and not just in that situation, like in, in so many other ways as well. But yeah, I think like I don't remember if this was like a story that I had originally planned out. I had like a whole like list of different stories that I wanted to see. And Yeah, I think like it just became kind of apparent like I needed some sort of break in between the Vision story and the last story. So ultimately this is how this story came to be. And yeah, I guess that's where the idea of like, well, what kind of break would happen like in between like two kind of larger ideas, and just, the need for like Pana to at least think about what they learned and like what they're going to do. So, and like throwing a dragon into it because why not?
Why not? I mean, it's very thrilling and a little scary, I'm sure, for the people on that boat, but they're trapped.
Oh my word, those poor people on the boat who are like, we're just gonna go on a trip across the bay, and then not realizing like all these things are gonna happen.
Yeah. Which, I mean, does feel a lot like just being a person in the world. You're going along your day and then you realize climate change is here. The water you're drinking has microplastics in it. Don't get bottled water anymore. So it is a lot of like coming along, and then somebody one day is like, "Hey, this bad thing is happening. Maybe you should do something about it." And you're completely, maybe some people might feel more prepared than others, but completely unprepared to react on an individual level, or, you know, I guess the first default would be, for me at least, would be like, what can I do?
Mm,
When I do think what can we do is a more productive question, but also a lot harder to answer, because who is the we that we're talking about, and how can like that we exist? Like, how do we find people to make a we? I mean, environmental groups, or, different ways to create community and build community definitely exist. But it is really hard, especially with people, you know, just making their own decisions and living their own lives. Like the people on the boat all coming onto the boat being like, we have our own aims in life and reasons for going on this boat and taking this journey. So, how do we mesh these all together when we're thrown into one dragon sized problem together?
yeah, for sure. Definitely making that we is like very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Which I guess kind of goes to the question of how to translate individual responsibility to a shared sense of community responsibility, is the best phrase I'm thinking of.
Hmm.
But in a way that doesn't just lead to somebody being like, who's going to be the president, who's going to be the leader to tell us what to do.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. It's like actually having like a community type of thing and not just like delegating it to like, oh, one person, like you go and figure it out and like tell us what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Or the idea of like diffusion of responsibility. If 10 people are told to get this done, none of them are going to get it done as fast as like 2 people, because they feel accountable to it, because they know there's only one other person working on this task.
yeah. Or even, I mean, that's just making me think of like lifeguard training. We were always told, so like when you're telling people to call 911, get the AED, like you point to someone. You're like, you do it. Because like if you're just like, oh, someone do it, then everyone's gonna be like, oh, well, like who's doing it? Like, who's gonna go and do this thing? I mean, that is making me think like it is important to have like some sort of leader sometimes. So like in that situation, the lifeguard being the leader. In this case, you have like sort of a group of leaders. You have like being the ship captain who's like, oh, this is my, like, I know how the ship works. This is what we need to do. And Pana being the person who really knows dragons. So like they're making decisions for the rest of the crew. But at least like you still have everyone else, like, Vare and Bob and Tally and MC, who kind of stand in for the community, since I'm not having like every single passenger on the boat as a character like come and do things. Yeah, I don't know how well like I write them coming together as a community, but there's definitely this sense of like they can't overcome like a dragon by themselves. You need multiple people to help like lift that net once they capture the dragon and to like do everything to like put that in place in the beginning anyway.
Yeah, I think those kinds of things are tricky. Like, how do you find the people who are willing to sign on? Like, how do you find enough people who are willing to make the individual choice to, like, put aside their personal wants or needs to a certain degree a little bit more to serve the community? Which definitely, I think the people you pick, like MC, Tally, Bob, Vari, are people who have those kinds of personalities that they're willing to sign on and opt in a little bit more than perhaps the average person would. Not that they're like doing it to an extreme degree of, self sacrifice, but just there is, I guess, a trade off or compromise. And some people are more in a position to do it than others.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was what I was gonna ask next, like the the idea of because I think there's some cases where you don't like people shouldn't be expected to come forward and put themselves at risk to do like certain things. I mean, there's definitely things like as a community we need to face. So like climate change being one of those and like so many other issues that like impact people. I can't think of like a good larger scale issue that I think people like shouldn't get involved in and like are within their rights to kind of take a step back from. I'm sure those exist, but I think I generally lean towards like, oh, we need to collectively all like do more. But I think certainly on an individual level, like how involved you get in like a certain maybe there's like a club at your school and you're like, I feel strongly about this club, but like I don't know if I'm the best fit to like take on this position of responsibility. Or if you're like planning a surprise party for someone and like, tasks are being delegated out to people and you're like, oh, like I don't know. Like I live in Arizona and like the party is in like I don't know, Athens and you're like, oh, I don't think I am the best person. Like I don't know if I can do this and like get the flowers there on time or whatever. That's an awful example, but just this idea like in our own lives of like things where like sometimes it's okay to take a step back and be like, oh, I care about what's happening. I care about like the person and the people this impacts, but I don't think I am the best person for this, or I don't think I can take on this responsibility. So, I mean, I try to like put that in here a little bit, I think. I mean, that's ultimately where like Pana's questions and thought process is going to, but I'm not sure. I'm ultimately like super happy that they go and decide to like help out with the weapons because I think I would have been very upset with them. And again, like I know that I can like make whatever happen that I want. While like taking the author out of it for a moment, like I would have been super upset if Pana had decided like, hey, I don't want to get involved. Even though it probably would have been fair to a certain degree because this is such an extreme situation. Like I don't think the situations we face in dealing with the issues that like affect our communities are usually as big as anything that Pana is facing. But I do think like I wanted to show the importance of taking on that responsibility and putting the community like before yourself. So, and I'm kind of thinking like the phrase that keeps just coming to mind is like the greater good, and that's a whole important like Harry Potter thing. And I think there's this idea in the fan community of like Dumbledore as this villain who like uses Harry and that is fair, but at the same time like Harry's the only one who has even like the potential of beating Voldemort, and he like needs to do this thing. And I would like to say that Harry has like a choice to not do that if he doesn't want to. But like how awful would that be if you're like, oh, I'm the only one who can like save the entire wizarding world and like the muggles and whatever. And like I'm just gonna go like camping for the rest of my life. I think that would have been a very, very sad story.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think because Pana is the bearer of the one true stone, the no, there it's been confirmed there's more than one stone, but Pana happens to have one of them. But Pana is kind of in that similar situation of being like the person who is in the best position to take on this responsibility, but still doesn't quite feel like they are up to it. Like, are they capable of doing the things, destroying the weapons? And I think the fact that there is this moment of choice where they do decide to do it and aren't simply forced into it is really important, because it's true circumstances do force someone into doing things, but there really is always the choice to do nothing or to hide or run away. And those are like fair actions when, I mean, depending on the circumstance of like, let's avoid this war. I don't feel like fighting. I'm going to dodge the draft because my life isn't worth, you know, patriotism or whatever. Or I don't believe in the war effort, so I'm not going to risk my own life for that. But I think Harry's situation, obviously, fantasy world logic is a little bit different. um,
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting from a moral point to consider. Certainly not any kind of expert on those things, morals and ethics. But the idea of like having a choice versus was the choice ever there to begin with, where I think Pana's story has definitely been constructed to where they do have a choice from the very beginning and they continue to opt into it consciously, and like with whatever information is available to them, they make the best choice they can. And I don't think Harry necessarily is in that position to have all the information that he can have at that moment before he makes his choice, because Dumbledore kind of keeps the information from him. But that's another story, and certainly some of that information shouldn't be told to a child.
Yeah, I think the idea of like a choice is super important, and like Pana could choose to like just leave and give the stone to someone else. Yeah, but I just still think it would have been like, I mean, and this is the hard part about reading and writing it too. Like there's so many times where we make choices that they don't benefit or that like hurt other people too. So like, I mean, I'm saying that Pana would have like upset me if they didn't go and do this thing, knowing full well that like not every choice that I make is really great either. So like, Pana is this like fictitious way of like seeing what would happen like if certain choices were made. Okay, but moving on from there, we're gonna each just pick out a favorite line of ours. Izzy, do you want to go first?
Sure. I just picked the opening three lines for, or I guess four sentences but two lines of the story, because I thought they were very nice. This is right after the Visions chapter where they all fell asleep. So now everybody is waking up. And this is Vare waking up. She woke up with a gasp. Sweat coated her body, causing her to shiver. Her fingers tingled. Her hair swung down in front of her eyes, tickling her nose. I'm just a fan of, imagery. I feel very in the moment with the way this is described.
Yeah, I am not usually good at imagery, so I'm glad you enjoyed those lines. The line that I chose is just this is my favorite character, like the ship captain, who I just make as awkward as I can. And she and Pan are looking at these animals and like just goes, "We call those blobs," she said. "They look very gooey." like a blob. And I like the idea of there just being this like giant gooey blob as an animal that's just like roaming around on the sea. I mean, that's what jellyfish are. They're just gooey blobs. So,
So mysterious.
yeah. And apparently like they can't sting your palm. So, if you see a jellyfish,
What?
yeah, when I was in Virginia working, one of the people I was working with, he would just catch jellyfish in his hands. And he's like, yeah, they don't sting your palms because they need like to go through, I guess the venom or whatever goes through like pores and like where your hair like comes out, so like the follicles, like those openings. And your palms, there are no like little openings. So if you just like hold a jellyfish in your palms, you won't get stung. I don't recommend trying this if you don't want to, and definitely not with like certain lethal types of jellyfish. If you're in like Long Island, the jellyfish are fine, even if they do sting you. It'll just hurt, but like you'll be okay. So I
I
just
want to try this, but
I never
I don't
did.
live near the ocean.
Yeah, I like the concept of it. I never tried it. I don't think I would. But with that, we're gonna wrap it up. Are there any like final thoughts you have?
I guess I'm thinking from a writing standpoint, it's a very fine line between having a character who's waffly and a character who has genuine doubts. Maybe this is a little bit of a controversial opinion, but the main character from Dune, Paul, is a waffle character, which I guess is kind of the point of the writing. They're trying to break the hero's, you know, journey story down in a certain way, but he's a waffle character to me. He has too many doubts, and it's just not compelling, or to me, it's very frustrating to read. Because not that a person can't have doubts after they make a decision and choose a certain course of action. It's realistic to have regrets and second thoughts. But to constantly be questioning your purpose, and it's a little too much. I think you hit the right balance here, because I would say, narratively speaking, having a few moments of second guessing or of like, what the heck, reality check here is definitely necessary. For a reader, for me, I would be very happy. I'm unhappy if there's too many or too few reality checks happening.
Yeah, I think just my kind of final thought is just that writing this was definitely like very difficult for me, and like I mean we've talked about it before, just the idea of like individuals and what a person like wants and what impacts a person as being like much more difficult for me to think about than like larger scale like geography type things. So this was definitely kind of a struggle. But yeah, I think like just going through and like checking with a friend and being like, oh, does this seem like realistic or reasonable to you or like interesting, is a good way to figure out if you're writing, if what you're writing is working for other people too. That's usually my go-to with a lot of things, just like check in with someone else and get like a different perspective. But I think that's like the main thing I'm thinking of right now.
Yeah, I'm also thinking it can depend for the character on how you construct your character's psychology. Like, is this a character who already feels, for whatever reason, an excessive extent of community responsibility? Maybe they were raised to, not feel like they ever did quite enough, and so therefore they sign on to over excel and overextend themselves in all the areas because they feel like they are never quite meeting some mysterious standard that doesn't exist. So in that case, I would say that would be a character who doesn't have reality checks a lot, where they're like, should I really be getting involved here? But I would say for most types of characters, there would be a moment where they're thinking, what's going on? Why am I signing up for too many extracurriculars now?
Yeah, It's definitely about that character. Emperor Palpatine does not have these doubts.
Yeah.
But that's about it. Thank you all for tuning in. We really appreciate you listening. We hope you have an excellent day. And feel free to check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description below. It would mean a lot to us if you checked it out. We're still working on developing it. But yeah, see you all next time.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Bye.
I'm looking at my palm and I'm like, huh, interesting.